The arrow was still quivering in the gold when Darnell Cross turned around and laughed. He laughed the way young men laugh when they are certain the world has already decided to belong to them. Loud, open, shoulders back, looking at his teammates first to make sure they were watching. They were. They always were. The compound bow in his hand cost $4,200. It had a digital sight, a stabilizer the length of a man's forearm, and a draw weight calibrated by a computer in a shop in Colorado Springs. The arrow had flown 300 yards and struck within a half-inch of center. Darnell Cross had done this 11 times in a row, in front of 60 people gathered on the flat, sun-hammered grass of the Pinecrest Outdoor Range in eastern Tennessee, on a Saturday morning in late September. The arrow was still quivering when he looked at the old man sitting in the folding chair at the edge of the line. And the old man was looking back at him with no particular expression at all. His name was on the sign-up sheet as R. Calhoun. Nobody there knew the first name. The range officer had written it in pencil and not asked questions, because the old man had paid his entry fee in exact cash, $40, folded neatly in half, and had set his equipment bag down without fuss and taken the last chair on the end. He was wearing a canvas hat that had lost its shape sometime in the previous decade, a flannel shirt the color of dried pine needles, and trousers that had been hemmed and re-hemmed until the hems were thick as rope. His hands rested on the tops of his thighs. Still. Completely still, the way hands are still only when they have learned stillness the hard way, in conditions where movement could cost you more than a competition. He was 81 years old, though most of the people there that morning would have guessed higher. The weather had worked on his face for decades. His shoulders curved forward with the slow gravity of age. Darnell Cross looked at him the way a person looks at something that has wandered into the wrong place. "You competing today, sir?" One of Darnell's teammates asked it, grinning just enough. The old man turned his head slowly. "Looks like." "With what?" The teammate, a broad kid named Trevor, 3 months off the Olympic trials, 2 bronze medals on his equipment shelf at home, pointed at the bag. It was canvas, military green canvas, stitched and restitched, a bag that had been somewhere and then somewhere else and then many places after that. The bow case that stuck out of the top of it was wooden, not a composite carry case. Wood, wrapped in a canvas sleeve. Darnell made a sound that was not quite a word and turned back to his target. The range that morning was running an open-distance challenge, an unofficial event, the kind that happens in the South on autumn weekends when the air is cool and the light is long and people want a reason to be outside with something worth doing. The format was a ladder. Shooters picked their distance, declared it before they drew, and had to place 5 arrows inside a 12-inch ring. The declaration distance could be increased each round. Prize money sat in a lockbox on the range officer's table, $3,000, donated by a local sporting goods sponsor, and 2 private patrons who liked watching people try hard things. The record for the day, at the time the old man sat down, was 340 yards, shot by Darnell Cross in the 3rd round, all 5 arrows inside the ring. Most of the other competitors had dropped out before 300. The crowd that remained, 60, then 70 people as word drifted into the parking lot, had gathered on the near side of the safety rope, half of them holding coffees, most of them watching Darnell the way people watch a thing they want to see break its own record. The range officer came down the line taking declarations for the next round. He reached the old man last. 360 yards, the old man said. He said it quietly with no particular drama, the way a man orders something he has eaten before. The range officer looked at his clipboard. He looked at the bow case. "Sir, the current record for the day is 340. "I know." Somewhere behind the rope, someone laughed. Then more than one person laughed. Darnell Cross had his back to the old man, adjusting his sight, but he turned at the sound and then he looked at Trevor, and Trevor shrugged, still grinning. 360 yards, the range officer said, writing it down. Because those were the rules, and the rules did not require a person to be young. The old man reached into his canvas bag. The bow he assembled piece by piece on his knees was a traditional recurve. No sight, no stabilizer, no mechanical release. The riser was pale ash wood, worn smooth, the grain showing through decades of handling the way a river stone shows its years. The limbs were laminated, wood and fiberglass, handmade, the kind of construction that had not been standard since the 1960s. He strung it from memory, without looking down, his fingers moving over the limb tips with the certainty of a mechanic who knows the tolerances of an engine without consulting a manual. The string was fresh. He had replaced it that morning in the parking lot, sitting in his truck. But the bow was not. The bow was 53 years old. He had made it himself. People were watching now. Watching in the way people watch when they have started with amusement and found something underneath the amusement that they don't have a name for yet. The old man stood up. Standing, he was shorter than he looked sitting. 5'7", maybe. The bow in his left hand was 60 inches tip to tip. He pulled a single arrow from a plain leather quiver. Wooden shaft, hand-cut turkey feathers, a broadhead tip he had resharpened the night before with a whetstone, and he walked to the line. He did not look at Darnell Cross. He did not look at the crowd. He looked downrange, at the target 360 yards away, a white circle on a straw bale that looked at that distance like a coin dropped in the grass. He stood there for a long time, a full minute, maybe more. The crowd went quiet in stages, the way a room goes quiet when something is about to break or something is about to be beautiful, and nobody yet knows which. Darnell Cross put one hand on the rope and watched. The old man was reading the grass. He was watching the way it bent in the middle ground, a slow lean to the right at about 180 yards, where the terrain dropped slightly toward a dry creek bed and funneled the wind. He was watching the flag on the range fence, a small orange square barely moving. He was watching the way the light came off the straw bale. He had no instruments. He had eyes that had done this in places where the stakes were not a lockbox and a crowd, but something that cannot be put back once it is spent. Vietnam. 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, 1st Marine Division. Assigned as a long-range observer and marksman to a 4-man team operating out of a fire base northeast of Khe Sanh, 1968. He had carried a bow, a recurve he had made himself from available materials in country, because a bow is silent, and silence in the jungle is the difference between a mission and a grave, for 11 months. He had put arrows through things at ranges that his after-action reports did not fully describe, because some things in war are better left in the language of results. He had not talked about this to anyone at the range that morning. He had not talked about it at all in many years to anyone who was not already in that particular silence with him. He closed his eyes. 60 seconds. Still. When he opened them, he raised the bow. His draw was slow. Not the slow of weakness, but the slow of a man who has learned to let a thing settle before it moves. His right hand came back to the corner of his jaw, the traditional anchor, and it came back to exactly the same place it had come back to for 6 decades, the groove worn into muscle memory so deep that the body does not need to be told. He held. He breathed out. Half. He held the remaining breath. The crowd was absolutely silent. Darnell Cross was not moving. The arrow left the bow with a sound like a single word spoken quietly in a large room, a low, clean note, the string singing once and going still, the shaft already gone, already climbing the long arc toward something 360 yards away. Seconds passed. At that distance, you wait for it. Even modern arrows, even the fast carbon shafts in Darnell's quiver take time to cross that kind of ground. A traditional wooden arrow, hand-fletched, takes longer. The weight is part of it. The weight is where everyone in the crowd held something in their chest without knowing they were holding it. Then, the sound. A clean, dry impact. The hollow thump of a point driving into straw, carried back on the wind. The range officer had binoculars. He put them to his eyes. He looked for a long time. Then he lowered them and looked at the old man. "Inside the ring," he said. One person applauded. Just one, for 3 seconds, while everyone else processed what they had heard. Then the sound spread. It started as a murmur, people turning to each other, saying it again, 360 yards, and it became something louder. The old man turned back to his quiver. He pulled a second arrow. He repeated the process. The reading of the grass, the stillness, the anchor, the breath half gone, and then the note of the string and the long wait and the sound. Inside the ring. Third arrow, fourth, fifth. Every time, the crowd's response climbed a step. By the 5th arrow, when the range officer said, "Inside the ring," for the 5th consecutive time, there was no measured reaction from the audience. There was noise, the kind that comes from the body before the mind gives permission, the kind that happens in stadiums when something occurs that people know they will describe for years. Darnell Cross was standing with both hands at his sides. His bow was on the ground. He did not remember setting it down. Trevor was 3 feet behind him, and Trevor was not grinning anymore. Trevor had his hands pressed together in front of his mouth, the way a person prays or the way a person tries to keep something in. The range officer walked down to the old man. "Sir, would you like to declare for the next round?" The old man was already sitting back down in his folding chair. He set the bow across his knees. He reached into the canvas bag and pulled out a thermos, metal, dented, with a screw cap. And he poured himself a cup of something that steamed in the autumn air. 380 yards, he said. The crowd heard it and did something that can only happen when a human being exceeds what an audience believed was possible. They cheered the declaration. Before a single arrow flew, they cheered the willingness to try the impossible thing again. Darnell Cross walked to the rope. He walked past it, actually, stepped over it, which technically put him in the range area, which was against the rules. But the range officer did not move to stop him. He walked toward the old man. He stopped 3 feet away, and he stood there. "Who are you?" Darnell asked. The old man looked up at him. "Raymond Calhoun." He took a sip from his cup. "Retired." "From what?" Raymond looked at him for a moment. "Several things." Darnell stood there another second. He looked at the bow. He looked at the quiver, the hand-cut feathers, the wooden shafts. "That bow is older than I am. By about 30 years. You made it?" "In a fire base outside Khe Sanh," Raymond said. 1968. Materials available were a downed communications pole, gut line from a resupply, and a piece of aircraft-grade aluminum I'd been carrying as a scraper. He looked at the bow. "Had to improvise the limbs. Took 6 weeks to get the tiller right." Darnell's jaw had shifted in a way that changed the whole set of his face. "You used that in Vietnam?" "Not this one. Built several. This is the last one I got home with. The others I left with people who needed them more." He paused. "In the jungle, a rifle gives your position. A bow does not. We operated 14 miles behind the line on certain patrols. Sound discipline was not optional." The crowd had gone quiet again, but differently quiet. Before, the silence had been anticipation. Now the silence was something that took up more room, the kind that gathers around a truth arriving later than it should have. Darnell Cross looked at the old man's hands. He looked at the groove on the inside of Raymond's right index finger, the groove that decades of a bowstring will wear into skin, the groove that does not come from a hobby and does not come from competitions in Tennessee on autumn weekends. It comes from something that was practiced past the point of skill into the body itself. "How many years?" Darnell asked. He meant the bow. He meant all of it. Started shooting traditional in 1959, Raymond said. I was 14. My uncle took me out behind his farm in Harlan County, Kentucky, gave me a self-bow he'd cut from a hedge apple tree, and told me I couldn't come inside for lunch until I put 3 arrows in a coffee can at 40 yards. A woman behind the rope made a small sound. Took me until sunset, Raymond said, but I made it. He finished his cup and screwed the cap back onto the thermos. You want to step back over the rope, he said, before the next round starts. Darnell Cross stepped back over the rope. What happened in the next round is difficult to describe in sequence because it was not, for the people standing in that Tennessee field, a sequence of events. It was a single long intake of breath that never quite completed. Raymond declared 380 yards. He stood at the line. He read the grass and the flag and the light. He stood still for 90 seconds, longer than before, because the distance was longer, because the wind in the creek bed was shifting in a way that required more time to understand. A child at the back of the crowd asked her mother what he was doing. Her mother did not answer because her mother was watching too hard to speak. Raymond raised the bow. He drew. He anchored. He held. The crowd had stopped breathing. He released, and the arrow crossed 380 yards of Tennessee air, and when the range officer said inside the ring for the 6th time that morning, Darnell Cross sat down on the grass. He just sat down. Cross-legged in the grass, looking down range. He shot 4 more arrows. 6 out of 5, the range officer had to check the scoring sheet because Raymond had put 6 arrows inside a 12-inch ring at 380 yards, which was not possible with a traditional recurve built by hand in 1968 by a 14-year-old who taught himself by a coffee can behind a farm in Harlan County, except that it had just happened in front of 70 people who would tell the story for the rest of their lives with the particular intensity of people who know they witnessed something they cannot fully explain. The range officer brought the lockbox to the old man. Raymond Calhoun looked at the $3,000 inside it for a moment. He closed the lid. Give $2,000 to the range's junior program, he said. Whatever they need, targets, arrows, bows. Young people should learn to do this right. He paused. I'll take the other $1,000. I owe my granddaughter a birthday. The range officer nodded like a man receiving instructions he will remember precisely. Darnell Cross had gotten up from the grass. He was standing off to the side, his $4,000 bow in his hand, and he was doing something his face had not done in public in a long time. He was rearranging. The muscles around his jaw, his eyes, the way he held his mouth, all of it was shifting into a configuration that had less room for certainty and more room for something else. He walked toward Raymond, and when he got close enough, he stopped. I laughed at you, Darnell said. When you walked in, He stopped, started again. I didn't know what I was looking at. Raymond was putting his bow back into its canvas sleeve. He did it slowly, the way he did everything, without wasted motion, each step placed deliberately. Most people don't, he said. It's fine. It's not fine. Darnell said it with a weight that was not practiced. You were a Marine. You were in Vietnam. You carried a bow behind enemy lines and shot at distances that... He stopped again. And I was laughing because your bag was old. Raymond got the bow fully into its sleeve and set it in the canvas bag. He looked up at Darnell. Darnell. He had heard someone use the name earlier. How old are you? 26. I was 23 when I was in country. Raymond's voice was level, unhurried, the voice of someone speaking from a place that stopped requiring urgency a long time ago. At 23, I thought I knew how to do everything I needed to know how to do. And I did know some of it. I was genuinely good at some things. He reached down and picked up his folding chair, collapsing it with one motion. The part I didn't know yet was how much there was that I hadn't seen. You can't know that at 26. The world has to show you. That's what today was. The world showing you. Darnell Cross looked at him for a long moment, then he looked at the ground. Then he looked back up, and he held out his hand. Raymond Calhoun shook it. But Darnell did not let go immediately. He kept holding it, and he turned Raymond's hand slightly, and he looked at the groove on the inside of his index finger. That permanent mark worn by a bowstring over 6 decades of real use. And his expression was the expression of a young man looking at evidence of something that did not have a shortcut. "Can I ask you something?" Darnell said. "You can ask." "The 60-second stillness before you shoot. What is that?" Raymond picked up his bag. He settled the strap on his shoulder. "That's the time it takes to stop thinking about yourself and start thinking about the arrow." He looked down range at the target 380 yards out, barely visible in the morning light. When you stop thinking about whether you're going to do it right, you've got nothing left but the target, the wind, and the string. That's when the shot happens by itself. He looked back at Darnell. Takes most people their whole life to get there. Some people never do. He started walking toward the parking lot. Slow, steady steps. The canvas bag on one shoulder, the folding chair tucked under his other arm. Trevor was standing near the rope. When Raymond passed him, Trevor said nothing. He stood straight, the way men stand when they understand they are in the presence of a measure they have not yet reached. The crowd parted. Not dramatically, not all at once. People stepped back naturally, the way people make room for something that has earned its path. 2 older men near the back took their hats off. One of them, a heavy-set man in his 60s who had not said anything all morning, pressed his hat to his chest as Raymond passed. Raymond acknowledged none of this. He walked the way he had walked to the line, the way he had stood at the line, the way he had done everything that morning, without advertisement, without acknowledgement of the watching, simply in the direction of whatever came next. The truck he drove was a 1987 Ford F-150, dark green, the fender on the passenger side replaced at some point with one from a different year that was close but not quite the same color. He opened the bed and set the canvas bag in it with care, folded the chair, set it alongside the bag, closed the tailgate. He got in, sat for a moment. On the seat beside him was a photograph, a framed photograph, 4 inches by 6, that his granddaughter had sent him 2 months ago for no particular reason except that she had found it in a box and thought he should have it. It showed a young man, 23 years old, kneeling beside a river somewhere very green, a recurve bow across his knees, grinning at whoever was holding the camera with the total confidence of a person who does not yet fully